Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast, episode number 27. This time I'm sitting down to have a conversation with my good friend, Liam Forde. Now, Liam and I met probably nearly 20 years ago delivering avatar courses. He was one of the early adopters of the use of these incredible materials. And so he was a real old hand when I first turned up to do a course and then deliver courses. And over time, we connected. We really enjoyed each other's company and have spent a lot of time together doing work with each other, also just sharing a friendship. He's a really decent guy. And whilst he's not delivering Avatar, Liam is the founder and chief executive of The Zone. Now, The Zone started out in New Zealand because Liam's a Kiwi, of course, and they spread right across the world working with executive teams from really big companies, for example, Vodafone. And Liam has personally helped so many of those executives get control of themselves to operate from greater levels of integrity and service. So I really appreciate his work. I really enjoy his perspectives. He's got a great sense of humor, and he's a bloke who's quite happy to get vulnerable and be very, very real. And we decided to have this conversation because just recently Liam's mum left the planet and her passing was just so beautiful. And he listened to his intuition and it opened up an incredible possibility that saw a beautiful end for his beloved mum. So I said to him, come on the podcast and let's have a good chat and let's talk about our mums. So I really hope you enjoy this podcast and I really hope that you share it around because it's a pretty cool chat. So Liam Forde, welcome to the Good Bloke Not Woke podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing good, John. As you know, it's life is a journey, right? It's never a straight line.
Absolutely. And you're a real journeyman, aren't you? I mean, you've just been to India recently, yeah?
Yeah, I just got back from 10 days in India, 5 days of work and 5 days of heading up to Rishikesh and seeing the Beatles ashram and doing a bit of meditation in one of the pods there. And the acoustics are amazing in there, but it's all abandoned now. Yeah, it's all abandoned.
Was that the Maharishi? Was that who
Yeah,
was
the guy that brought in transcendental meditation. I mean, it's they've got signs there and it tells you all about it. So it's really cool. Yeah, India was a trip, man, because I know now why they're going to take over the world, right? Their education's great, and they've got a spiritual, grounding, which is sort of based on nature. So, they're not sort of worshiping one God. They're worshiping, nature and being kind and, but I reckon the thing that they've got nailed, it's total chaos. It's total chaos. So when they come into what we call the volatile, uncertain, complex, world that we call the VUCA world in business, it's like, hey, if you face this VUCA world, you've got to sort of get control of yourself. These guys don't even phased by it because their whole every day is total chaos. And the other thing was there's no road rage. Like people cut you up all the time. Like there's just everyone's like super kind. And if someone falls off or stops, 5 people will help them. They just know that collaboration is key and being united is the way forward rather than, trying to get one up on someone. But anyway, it was a funny experience.
It's like, because, a lot of Indian people come here to Melbourne and Sydney to do their university degrees. And a lot of them come here to study accounting.
Right.
Which is really interesting. But
anyway,
I used to catch Ubers a lot because I went through a period, especially when we were delivering Avatar a lot, when I was traveling so much, I just didn't bother having a car. And there's often Indian Uber drivers, and they never go over 40 k's an hour. It's like, you want to slap them in the back of the head, say, come on, mate, we can go a bit quicker than this. They've just got all the time in the world,
Well, that's because in India, you don't do that. It's 20 to 30 k's an hour.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So interesting because Glenn McGrath, I remember Glenn McGrath, the Australian fast bowler, he was telling me that he would get to go over there to some speaking gigs. So his agent would book him to go over there for a week and do these corporate speaking gigs. He said oftentimes he'd be in the lecture, in the conference room, and he'd be there booked to talk for 45 minutes. 10 minutes into the talk, the MC would interrupt him, the tables would get thrown to the side, and somebody would produce a cricket bat and a tennis ball. And they'd give him the bat because they all wanted to bowl at him.
That's it, folks.
That was my conference gig,
Yeah.
$20,000 later, that was,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's,
Well, yeah, it was like that in the conference that I was running. I had like 30 plus CEOs there for half a day. And my God, trying to get their attention focused, it's like herding. Well, you know what CEOs are like, they're the worst.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
like trying to herd cats, right? They all think
yeah,
they're the best, and one's looking this way, one's looking that, one's looking at his phone, one's looking at someone else, watching someone else is talking. And I started the talk off, and I was like, within 10 minutes, I was like, nah, this is not going anywhere. I said, guys, what the hell? It's like worse than herding cats now. You two over the back there, you two are talking too much. I'm splitting you two up, and the look on their face was like, oh, right. And they loved it. I had such good
yeah,
feedback at the end of it. They said that was the best because we had fun, right? We had fun just
yeah.
calling out what needs to be called out.
Well, so yeah, because you do a lot of work, I mean, all over the world with senior executive teams, yeah, from
Yeah,
some big companies. I mean, I speak to you and I never know which country you're in because you're in the UK or you're in the US or in Canada or somewhere else, and you
yeah,
must find, because in this podcast, we're talking about masculinity, right?
right.
And there's many different viewpoints on masculinity. And I'm just wondering, like, in your work, you must see so many variations and you must see men that you think, gee, I could model myself on this person. And you'd probably see some others and you think, my God, shoot me if I turn out like this.
Yeah, no, totally,
What a journey.
totally. And it's the way I've sort of structured it is what I call the whole person, which is when I go around the world, I often bump into CEOs or businesses that are run just by their head.
Yeah,
Everything's rational, everything's data, and feelings don't come into it. And of course, when you're trying to engage people and like engage customers, they want to feel something. They don't just want to be throwing data, right? And so teaching them that path between to get the head and the heart and have both of them lead is really important. And then when you find that your head and your heart are lined up in a nicely balanced and they're talking to each other nicely and there's not one dominant because the head you want that for strategy, right? The head's a useful tool, but the heart you want for engagement. That's where you connect, and that's where the passion comes from. And then once you get those two lined up, what I find is then you unlock intuition, right? And that's when your intuition, because intuition can be quite a quiet voice just in the background, sort of chatting away, saying, "Hey, John, you sure you're doing the right thing there, mate?" Or like, "Oh, I'm not sure about that." Like chatting away, and so if you're not present enough to and aligned enough to listen or hear it, even you can quite often start steering yourself in a bad direction, and that's what I call character. So
yeah,
character is what I think makes a good man.
yeah.
It's like talent.
And that really,
Talent gets you the job, and character gets you the leadership.
and that's really where I guess integrity and moral compass come into play,
Totally.
which is
Mhm.
real heart-based, right? I
Very
mean,
hard.
there can be learned integrity, like following rules that somebody's applied to you, which is fine. But that real leadership point, I talk about those times where it could be the lowly 19-year-old construction worker who's 3 months into his role,
Mm.
who's walking through the site one day and he notices something that's amiss. Like, for example, I was talking to a woman not long ago. Her son had his first job in construction. He was excited. He loved it. And 6 months in, he was killed under collapsing scaffolding.
Oh, oh.
And a lot of people walked past that scaffolding, and the inquest showed how badly it had been put together. But
Mm.
imagine if some guy who's doesn't feel he's very significant in the site walks past and goes, that doesn't look right. And he
Yeah,
goes to the foreman or the safety manager and goes, you got to go and look at that because that's not right. I say that in that moment, that young guy is leading that entire company.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, they always say it's what you walk past defines your leadership, right?
Yeah.
You walk
Mm,
past that piece of trash on the beach, or do you bend down and pick it up?
mm,
Do you walk past that person needing help and give them a hand, or do you just keep on walking past and think, I'm too busy? Like that to me defines what a real man is to me. It's that generosity of helping out, because we can. It's not because there's a rule that says, hey, help out or stand up in the bus there's an elderly person there, someone needs help, like you do it, right? And I think what that builds is character, but what it builds a sort of an inner strength, because quite often it's inconvenient. You're like, oh, you're trying to get somewhere fast, and and you see someone needs a help, and you just stop and give them a hand, and you have a little conversation, and they want to have a chat to you, and you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to be 5 minutes late for that meeting. But what I've always found is that if you take that time, you end up being 5 minutes late, but then the person that's going to join you is also 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late. And then when you tell the story, they then tell a story. Do you know what I mean? And it just, the value of that just is huge, humanity. And I think that's what really makes a man or a woman. But as we're talking about masculinity on this podcast, like that's what really, really makes it, because we're capable of doing that.
I agree. And it's like, I reckon that when somebody does have that intuitive hit and then they follow it, their self-confidence improves.
Yes.
Yeah. They trust themselves more,
Yeah.
And I reckon that there's a lot of men out there in the world who don't trust themselves.
No. Well, I think we're getting so many external signals, like the external signals from, the press, the social media, like, the toxic masculinity, and, guys are bad and things like that. And, and that's just bullshit, to be honest. It's absolute bullshit. Because, that we understand the world from a sort of a different viewpoint, a different lens, and we were designed in that way. And that's, it's really important to understand that there's a different design happening. When you design something different, it gets different signals, it gets different inputs, different sensitivities, and you have different skills, different talents, etc., etc. And your job is to apply those that you've got in the best way possible. And I don't know, I feel proud to be a man, like totally proud to be a man. And I think that the more men we can make feel proud, the better. And that doesn't mean to say I haven't done anything wrong, right? I can give you there's not even a roll of toilet paper thick enough for me. I can write down in like 8-point script.
That's right. Yeah.
Everything I've done wrong, right? And I think as you grow, as you get older, you look back on your life and you go, ooh, now from this perspective, maybe I wouldn't have done that, right? Maybe that wasn't such a wise thing. But that's what happens with age and experience. You're going to make mistakes. And I think there's a big difference between making a mistake, which we're going to make tons of them, right? And then doing something deliberately that you know is wrong. Those are two different camps. Making mistakes, like, hey, we all do it. But when you know you're going to do something wrong and you actually do it, then you got to look in the mirror. And I think that's a real important part.
Yeah, exactly. And that whole thing of, blaming your circumstance for then doing something that's really goes against what you know to be true or know to be right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a significant one. And that sort of can open up a whole can of worms. And perhaps what I'd like to sort of bring the conversation around to, and then there's going to be a lot of opportunity to explore those things, because I know I've got some things to share in that space, is that recently you were telling me about your mum.
Yeah.
And, you had a moment where you did follow your intuitive sense, Are you comfortable telling that story?
Yeah, I'm comfortable, because my mum and I were very close. We'd been close for a long time. I was the second son. I was the youngest, and there was 7 years different between me and my brother. And so I think in a strange way, my parents had me to try and iron out their differences. Like, oh, if we have another kid, it'll all be all right. But it wasn't. So I came from, like many people who are listening to this podcast, probably they come from not straight backgrounds, difficult backgrounds, difficult times. But like, despite all of those difficulties and despite all of the shit that mum had to endure, she never put anyone down. I kept, it was almost like a frustration for me. It's like, come on, mum, say something bad about something. No, there was always like, no, she could always see the other side of it. And so that's why, when she passed away a few weeks ago, I felt compelled to sort of write on my LinkedIn, which I don't ever do, is something that personal, just how amazing that experience was, and how she was the giant on which I stood. I wouldn't be who I am today without her. You know what I mean? Like, she just had a way of seeing the world differently, and not from the victim space, but from the space of like, I'm a creator. And yeah, times might be tough and things might be shit, but I can create my way out of it. And for her, that meant work, but also fun and relationships and things like that. So yeah, it was very special. Our relationship was very special over the years, and she was 98 when she passed, and I'd say that she lived for like 96 or 97 years, and the last 18 months she was existing. And I looked after her for the end part of her life. My brother and I would share time with her, and she'd come and live with us because we didn't want to put her into a home until we felt like we couldn't take care of her, and it was dangerous and not good for her. And then that time came, and I talked to her about it, and we'd have these conversations, really sort of deep conversations, and she was saying, "Oh, I don't know whether I want to live anymore. It's hard getting up in the morning." And I was like, "No, you can do it, Mum. You can do it." Like, I'd get her to walk, take her off her frame and get her to walk around, and I'd bring her smoothies, and she loved sushi, so I'd bring her sushi, and salmon sushi was her favorite. So I was like, "Oh, good, omega-3s." Right, that's good for your brain. And she had a bit of dementia, so the good thing was, even if I didn't turn up, she'd think I was there yesterday, and so she was always happy, right?
Sure.
But so I was always like doing chair yoga and doing this and doing that when I went to visit her, and really, really trying to extend her lifespan. And then I saw her at Christmas, and I just had this feeling like, oh, this is going to be the last Christmas. And I don't know why I had this feeling, but when you're close to someone, you sort of resonate with them. You have that empathy that goes beyond words. It's just like, and we didn't really have to say anything and stuff. So I got it to getting back to being very agile for Christmas dinner. And we had a Christmas dinner with about 25 people, as we normally do. And it was really good. And she just had a whale of a time, and no one expected her to turn up. And they all just had a whale of a time, and everyone wanted to take their 5 minutes sitting next to Alma, my mum, and chatting and stuff. And she just had the best time. And she was getting a bit tipsy. She had a couple of Prosecco's. And it's funny, like when she gets a bit tipsy, she was always fun, right? She was always fun. And she never drank a lot, but when she had a couple, she was always a bit funny. And then I could see them on the couch laughing and giggling and carrying on, and they were asking all sorts of things. And anyway, so I came back to Sydney for my son's wedding, and then after my son's wedding, I would just had this sort of really weird feeling, about my mum, and I was like, oh, and I thought, I'm going to have to do some work on my mum, because my intuition is saying something, and it's not that she's going to die, but there's something else. And so I sat, and got the old tools out of the tool bag, and I really started to feel into it, like really feel into it, not just the surface, like really, just feel into it, and sort of intensify my attention on my mum and stuff like that, and go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden I had this like just amazing epiphany that my mum wanted to go. She was ready. Her body was at the end, and she knew it, and she was ready to go. And I was the one that wasn't letting her go. And man, that was just such a mind-blowing experience, understanding that.
Stop being a mum, right? And you are her baby.
Yeah. Yeah. And what the only thought that mothers have about children is, are they okay? Right?
Yeah.
Are they okay? And then once they know they're okay, they can sort of let go. But it was me that was holding her here, not her. So I was like using my will to dominate her will. And I was like, wow, I don't want to do that. And so, I sat there, and I must have spent a good 3 or 4 hours going through our life from the earliest memories that I had. I've got a lot of memories, and just really picturing my mother as I knew her then, right the way through life to where she is now, and like feeling the gratitude and the love in every single one of those moments. It was incredible. and then letting go, and I cried for a while because it's tough. I still had that, like, no, I don't want to let go, but I knew that's what she wanted. She wanted to go and join her sisters and brothers and mother and fathers. And so, I called this post loving and letting go. So yeah. And I sort of reflected at the end of the post that, because I reflected on other areas of my life as well, because I've got 4 kids and 4 grandkids, and at some point, there's going to be loving and letting go through life. But I also got to the end point where I was like, wow, how does this apply to my enemies? Someone who has a different viewpoint than me, or someone that I'd perceived to trying to do me wrong, or whatever. And I thought, you know what? Isn't it a time to love them and let them go? And like, that was pretty cleansing as well. So
I said that's a great perspective,
yeah.
Yeah, really cool. So you got to be with your mum when she passed?
Yeah, so my brother called up and said, "Look, I'm not sure. Mum doesn't look so well." And I said, "Flip on the video," and I saw her, and I was like, "Immediate! I'm getting on a plane now," because I was in Sydney.
Yeah,
I was coming back in 2 weeks' time, so I just jumped on the flight and I rang Air New Zealand because they had already closed the flight, or closed the booking. So I rang
yep.
and said, "Hey, can you open a booking for me?" And so they opened a booking, which was really kind of them, and I managed to get on the flight. I arrived at 7 p.m. at night. I was beside mum's bed at 8 p.m. We had a chat. We had and then I stayed with her until she passed at 2:30 a.m. on the Sunday morning. I just held her hand, and it was amazing. And I just knew, I could feel when she'd gone. Like, I was just holding her, and I was like, she's gone. So
Story, yeah.
yeah, it was a blessing. And I mean, a lot of tears and things, but being there at that time in that way was grace. It really was. It was grace. And I mean, you know all the work that we've done to get there, and we owe a debt of gratitude to Harry Palmer and Stars Edge and all the avatar tools. Like, without that this moment would never have happened.
I mean, it's just listening to what you feel in that moment and trusting it. It's
Mm.
because I had a similar but different situation. My mum was she was only 83 when she passed away, and she suffered a stroke in early 2007, and she could no longer live at home. And so we needed to find a hostel for her, and we found a really good one. And she moved in there, and she wasn't really mobile. She lived in a wheelchair. Actually, she was just tired. She didn't want to try with the walker. She just wanted to stay in a wheelchair. But I'd often go in there to visit her, and she'd be sitting there next to another older person who was just new, who were distressed because they'd left their home, and she'd be just sitting supporting them. And because that's who my mum was, she was 4'11" and a half, and kindest human being I ever knew, and she lived like that for 5 years. And in 2012, about February, the doctors rang my sister, who was she was the contact person. She's a physiotherapist, and they said, look, your mum's got into renal failure, so she's probably going to last for about another 3 weeks, maybe. And my sister rang me, and I was really okay with that, because my mum had lived a good life, and I knew that she was tired, and so it was pretty easy for me to adjust to the fact that she was going to leave. So 3 weeks came and went, 3 months came and went, 6 months came and went.
Wow.
And mum was still there, and I'd go and visit her, and sometimes she'd be lucid and you have a conversation with her, and
Mm.
other times she was off in another time of her life, talking as if she was back in her 20s, and that was all okay. Anyway, she was declining. She was sleeping a lot more during the day, and I was in Orlando, at the W Tree Hotel in Orlando there on a course, and it was about 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. My phone rang, and it was my youngest brother. And he was on the other end of the phone. He's a big guy, my brother. He works in construction and all that. And he was crying on the other end of the phone. And I said, what's going on? And he said, oh, bro, he goes, I've just been to see mum. And he goes, I can't stand seeing her like this anymore. He said, it's just killing me. He said, what in hell is she hanging on for? And I hadn't even contemplated that my mum was hanging on. My viewpoint was her body just hasn't shut down yet.
Mm.
But he said that and it landed in my universe like somebody dropping a shot put on a wooden floor. It was like so I settled him down. I got off the phone and I walked around in a state of almost shock.
Mm.
Holy shit, that's exactly what it is. Like he put the label on it and the label landed so hard. And I sat on the floor a bit like you, and I just sat there in this quiet contemplation. I was asking the question, what is it? What are you hanging in for? And see, the backstory is that my older sister, she's a physiotherapist, she's an amazing sports scientist. She's held some incredible roles in sport. She's known across the world for her work. She's never, ever had a relationship. Just her
Mm-hmm.
life has been her work. And so she had a bit of time up her sleeve. So whenever she was free, and at the time she was head of the high performance unit at Melbourne Storm, whenever she had a few free hours, she'd go out to the hostel and sit with mum, and just make sure that mum was being cared for and she'd chat to her. And anyway, so I realised, like your mum, my mum couldn't let go because she hadn't finished being a mum. And she was
Mm.
worried about my sister because my
Yeah.
sister goes home alone every night. It was so
Wow.
clear. So I rang my sister, and it was Sunday afternoon here in Melbourne, and she answered the phone. I said, oh, what are you up to? And she said, oh, I'm just sitting here with mum. Of course she was, right?
Yeah.
And she said, do you want to talk to her? She's been pretty lucid this afternoon, she'll be able to hear. I said, yeah. So she put the phone up at my mum's ear, and I just started to talk from the heart, Liam, and talked about, how amazing my life had been because she was my mum.
Mm.
And I talked about all those incredible moments that were clear in my memory. And one that people love to hear about was when I was in my final year of school. I was at a boys' grammar school and I was the football captain and I was loving my life. And we had about 20 girls come to our school because they couldn't do the subjects they wanted at another school,
Mm.
at their schools. And so it was very important for me to have a freshly ironed shirt every day. And so I'd get up early in the morning, go for a run, and I would come back. And my mum, who had 9 kids to get moving, she'd be standing there as I come out of the shower with a freshly ironed shirt.
No way, mate.
Yeah, that was my mum. And anyway, when I got to the end of that, I said, now, mum, we need to have a bit of a chat. I'm guessing that maybe you're hanging on because you're worried about sis. And I said, I get it. She goes home every night. And I said, but I just want to let you know I'm going to take care of her. I promise you I'll check in with her and make sure she's okay. And I said, your job's done. And if you need to leave, it's really okay because, I've got it. And I just said, I love you very much. And I said, I'll see you among the stars one day and say good day to the old bastard if you see him. My dad had been gone for 10 years by then. And I hung the phone up. And then I rang back and my sister said, what did you just say to mum? And I said, oh, just told her how much I loved her. She
Yeah.
goes, oh, right, okay. Anyway, left that conversation and I packed up my stuff, went up to my room, brushed my teeth, got dressed, lay down on my bed. And I just lay there and I don't reckon I've felt more peaceful, Liam, in my
Mm.
life. And just contemplating the phone call. And I was lying there for a while, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and my phone buzzed. And I picked my phone up and there was a text from my sister and it just said, Mum just left.
Wow.
Amazing.
That's it, man.
And it was so, because my mum had such a deep belief in her Catholicism. I think she couldn't wait to get
Right.
to the other side to see what it was all about.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting, isn't it? But after our conversation, I started to really contemplate all that about our mums, and the
Mm.
role they have in helping us develop as masculine men and where it can also go off the rails.
Yeah.
And I think that I look back on my life, and I don't say this with any pride at all, the number of times I really abused my mum's trust as I was going into my teens and my 20s, because I used that sort of her mothering instincts and her love for her child and all that sort of stuff to get things from her,
Yeah.
you know. And I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about parasitic behavior, and it landed like, holy shit,
You were a
like I
parasite.
was being a parasite when I was doing that. It's like, oh God, it's so interesting.
Yeah, well, like all that manipulation and not telling her what you're really up to, and that was the same for my mum. I mean, I think it's almost like a rite of passage. Do you know what I mean? You realize as when you get older that it's actually more of a man to tell the truth than to try and cover it up, right?
Yeah,
That's what it takes to be that masculine energy is like tell the truth and face the consequences no matter what. But yeah, I used to sort of tell all the stories, and I'd come home and I remember once my mum, I'm in my room, and my mum, I heard the phone go, and then mum was chatting to someone. She says, "Oh, okay, 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 okay," and put it down. I just thought it was one of her friends. She comes out and she goes, "Oh, Liam, I just had this girl on the call, and she says she thinks she's pregnant," and I'm like, "What?"
she knew your mum.
Well, she rang me to tell me, but my mum answered the phone because in those days there was no mobile phones, so there's one phone
Yeah,
in the house. Your mum answers, and she just like mum was just one of those people that people would talk to. She was like no judgment, and because she had no judgment at all.
yeah,
People would talk to her because they
yeah,
they felt they could say anything. They felt safe, and so anyway, she wasn't pregnant, but anyway, I just said to mum, "Oh, okay, okay. Well, I'll take care of it." She said, "Oh, yeah, well, make sure you do because if she is pregnant, you need to do the right thing." Like that was it.
yeah,
And then my mum was a seamstress, right? So, and this is she was brought up, on a farm in far north of New Zealand in a place called Motukaraka, and left school at 14, came down to Auckland to come to the big smoke and became a seamstress. And anyway, so this was her trade. And I remember one time I came home and there was these two police cars out the front, and I was like, "Oh shit, what's happened?" So I go up there, and then she had this. My mum was like 5'1", like she was tiny, like your mum, and I'm 6'1". I don't know how tall you are, like 6'5" or something. Anyway, how they do it. I go up there, and then there's these six policemen sitting around the table in their underpants. I'm like, what the all having a cup of tea, and mum's sitting there having a cup of tea, giving them a biscuit. And I said, "Oh, what's happening?" And they all just said, "Oh, your mum's taking in our trousers or doing the hems or fixing a hole." So she had, I mean, these guys were huge, and they were sitting around her little table, all having a cup of tea out of her little cups and she'd given them ginger nuts or something. And I tell you what, and you know, I used to see that patrol car come past and slow down past Mum's place for years, right? All the police guys knew where to come to get their jeans mended for $10, which was cheap, and they'd always look after her. They'd always call in, say hi, walk in, and that was part of their patrol. So it's amazing, isn't it, how kindness sort of has this ripple effect and it comes back round. And I'll never, that image is burnt into my brain because it was such a shock.
interesting. It's like that. Those men obviously have an incredible love and incredible reverence for your
Yeah.
mum. And I remember sometimes I would come home, like I'd be 18, 19, and my mum would say something like, "Oh, you're home," and I would give her a sarcastic response to that, you know. And I look back and I go, well, why did I need to do that? What
Yeah.
was in my space I needed to do that? I could have also said something, yeah, Mum, I couldn't wait to see you, or something like that. But it was always, no, I'm not home. How did you work that out? And I look back on those things with some regret. But having said that, I'm educating a lot of younger guys at the moment. I'm saying to them, be good to your mum, be kind to your mum. do whatever you can to have some reverence for your mum, take care of her because she did take care of you. But I'm wondering whether, I don't know, where does it go wrong, do you think? Because you must have met so many men who are perhaps even in positions of power that don't have a great relationship with their mothers. And
Yeah.
where does it fall off?
Well, I think like, men, women, mums, dads, like you can't make a single bucket. You know, there's really, really good dads and there's dads that are really not good. And there's really, really good mums and there's mums that aren't so good, and that it's this huge variation. Um, and I think where people go wrong is when they resist what they've been given. So, you come into life. I mean, my dad wasn't good. My dad was basically violent. He was a big drinker and a big womanizer. And look, you could never predict. He comes in the door. He could be the happiest guy on the planet, or he could throw you against the wall
Yeah,
and beat you up, and slap you around. And that was my life for the first sort of 7 years. And I could have looked at that as being, oh, why did I get this? I could have been a victim of it. But because of the way my mum looked at it and accepted it without resisting it, I mean, it didn't mean to say she didn't try and get away and protect
yeah,
herself. I mean, not, that's not what I'm saying. It's not like just lie there and get beaten up, but it's not resisting it. And I think where I see people go wrong is when they resist what they have in front of them. And so they resist, oh, I was given a bad mum or whatever it was. It's like, and in a way, I feel like we're given these as gifts to grow as humans, right? So it's like, you know, whether you believe in God or not, let's say, God's given you a test. What can you make of your life? Okay, there's someone who's got a rich life and healthy life, and they have great mum and great dad and all that sort of thing, and they make whatever they make of their life. You've given a good mum and not so good dad, and born poor. What do you make of your life? Someone else might have both bad parents. What do you make of your life? And I think that's the grace of life, is how do you make the best of it rather than the worst of it? Because you can make the worst of it. And that's where I see in CEOs and executives that I work with around the world. If they can understand, it's sort of like the way I look at it, it's like a flow. This is being done to me, right? And so that's the victim mentality. This has been done to me. Now, if you can shift their mindset and open the door to this has been done for me, that's a big step, right?
yeah,
So all of a sudden they go, wow, this has been done for me. Wow, it's actually a bit of a gift. And without that gift, I wouldn't be who I am today. Well, it's like opens the door. But the next step is even bigger. This has been done by me.
yeah,
I've created it. So it's to me, for me, by me. And so I run a workshop on the to me, for me, by me.
yeah,
And when people really get the by me, like really get it, and not everyone gets this first time round, it is transformational, because then they become like so engaged in their life. And I have 100% agency about how I react or respond to life and what I make from my life. That's what I love about it. So the CEOs that I see that are stuck are in, oh, the market's done this to me, I've got a terrible exec team, or that person, or I'm not having a great relationship with the board, or do you know what I mean? And like if
yeah,
they stay in that victim mode, then that's disaster.
yeah,
You have to get them at least to this has been done for me, to help them then get more
yeah,
power and more agency and control what they can control. If you can get them to do to the it's done by me for some weird reason, that's real transformation.
so interesting, isn't it? Because I think of so many young guys who have got that really bad relationship with their parents, their mother, their father, maybe both, and they're in that space of this has been done to me. And I remember giving a talk to some schoolboys about how, I can walk into a room and I could say something really abusive to them in front of all their mates, something really humiliating. And there's two parts to it. One is me delivering that humiliating statement, And the second part is what they choose to do with it,
Mm.
and have they got enough bandwidth to see the statement for what it is, realize it's not about them, it's about me, and then create a response that's deliberate so that they can move the thing forward? Or do they just spend the rest of their life telling the world what an asshole I am and what I did to them? And, that's acceptable in our society. Whole societies are built on victimhood. In fact, probably the whole Western economy is built on victimhood, insurance and all that sort of stuff, and healthcare and everything's about, people being victims and then somebody rescuing them in some way, but moving them. So do you feel that, is there a connection, do you think, between those who are ready to grasp this is done by me? Is there a connection to how they're raised in their family and what sort of relationship they have with their parents?
That's a really good question. I've never thought of that. If there's some sort of common element between those people that take on that viewpoint faster than others, and maybe I'll sort of flip it a little bit and go a little bit spiritual on you. Spiritual on you. It's like I always have this belief that when someone calls me and says, "Hey, Liam, we'd like you to come and do some work with our organization." And as you know, I've done some work with some pretty big organizations who are global with thousands and thousands of people. And I've done work with little SME firms, tucked in the back ends of Melbourne somewhere. And so my belief is that when they call me, they're ready for awakening. And that's the belief I hold really dearly. And so, you know where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's like, and that's done by them. And that's what I say. It's like, so they subconsciously, not consciously, have got to a point where they've tried, like 50 different things to fix things, and going down the wrong road 12 times and then going, oh my God, it's still the wrong road. Wasn't that the Einstein thing, And then they get to a point where they reach out for something different because, my profile is not the norm. People know that of me. And so they'll reach out and say, hey, and then I know that is them subconsciously calling me in to say, help me move from to me to for me to by me. So that's not really answering your question, but it is in a funny other way that
I get it.
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit like, we deliver avatar courses. Sometimes people would say to me, "Oh, thank you for thinking of me and sharing this with me. That's so cool. I feel really supported." And I just say to them, "Well, no, you found me. You found it. You must have been ready for it. You must have been looking for it at some level to find it. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened." And that, for some of them, they go, "Oh shit, I never thought of it that way," because it's always the view that something's happening to me, something's coming at me, there's a circumstance that's popped up,
Yeah.
Very difficult for people to grasp that thing of, no, I'm creating this right here, right now,
Yeah.
And it's, like I've met a lot of people in sport who've got amazing positive attitude, incredible positive attitude. Like one old coach, Tommy Hafey. Tommy coached Richmond to 4 premierships. He coached a lot of other teams. Tommy only ever wore T-shirts. He never had a windbreaker on or a wind shirt. He just wore T-shirts. And at the age of 80, he filmed a television commercial to celebrate Jeep's 70th birthday. If you look it up on YouTube, you find it,
Oh, I'll make a note of that.
Yeah, and Tommy, had this craggy old head on a 30-year-old body. He was muscular, strong, and he lived around the corner. And I used to often see him out there running in the mornings. And we'd be out there some mornings, it'd be 2 degrees, and it'd be raining, and it'd be cold, and it'd be awful. And you'd run past Tommy, and he'd go, "What a beautiful day."
Ah,
Beautiful. Just had that. But he used to say to kids, if it's to be, it's up to me.
yeah.
And he would go, and Tommy spent his life in service once he retired from coaching. He was out at schools every day talking to kids about taking responsibility for their lives.
That's the secret sauce, man. That's the secret sauce. And like, any guys or anyone listening to this podcast that really want to change their life, and that's where it starts, like from Maslow's hierarchy. And if you want to get to self-actualized, first step is take control of your life. But that's only the first step, because the real step is service to others, right?
Yeah, when I was working in football, my last stint was at Richmond Football Club, and Brendan McCartney was an assistant coach, and he went on to be a senior coach. And he's one of those, probably only one of two or three people who have been a senior coaches at an AFL club without actually having played senior football in the AFL, And he was a great teacher. And I heard him say to the players one day, I don't mind you having a bad day, but I won't tolerate you having a shit day. And what he meant by that was, okay, you might have a day where the ball's just not bouncing your way, but that doesn't mean you can't tackle, you can't chase, you can't shepherd, you can't make space. You can work your ass off doing all those things and not get one kick because the ball's just not bouncing your way. But he'll view that as a great contribution to the team.
Yeah, totally. You can help someone else, get the score, right?
Yeah, it's like a selflessness and instead of sitting back sulking because things aren't going your way, it's like you get in and you do something.
Yeah, well, I don't know where I heard this stat or if it's true. You'll tell me because you're bigger into sports. But they did, some famous football player that was like a prima donna type football player. They tracked what happened when he went to different clubs. He was always the star, but the club's overall performance dropped because it was all about him. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, and I was told a story to me and it sounded true, but
It could be, it's like, well, the other side of it, my nephew, Tommy Campbell, Tommy's playing at Melbourne Football Club now. Now, Tommy's 33, he's 6'8", big dude. And he is in his 13th season in the AFL now and his fourth club, and he's played 58 senior games.
wow.
There's a potential to play 22 senior games at least per year. So if he's been in the system for 13 years, he could have played nearly 300 games. But you know why the clubs keep him in there? Because what he brings to the club's culture.
Right.
Just the service and the stability and the work ethic. Because on the training track, he dedicates himself to doing everything he can to make every one of his teammates a better player.
And you know what? Service, stability, work ethic. You've just talked about some of the traits of real masculinity.
Yeah.
Because that stability, when your emotions can trigger you and you can go flying off into 100 different directions, or you're going to get angry about something and you've got a choice in that moment, like, do you lash out or do you stand your ground but stay true? That's that's masculinity to me, or that's the, like being a man. It's that service, like I was talking about before, helping someone across the road, less able than you, giving someone a hand up. Someone's down there. You can either look down on them and going, oh God, or you can reach down and give them a hand up. Even your competitors, like you see it on the footy field, right? You see it in sport. I was watching the basketball yesterday, and there's some big dude. He's like 7. He's like 8 foot almost, and he knocked this guy over to the ground, and the guy was clearly sort of hurt, and he just goes up and picks him up. Do you know what I mean? And he was sorry, and he knew he'd done it. It was he'd given him a bit of an elbow, but
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like, we can compete and we can have a good go, and then at the end of it, we're there to pick you up if you fall down and look after you. And the stability, and the work ethic, putting in the work ethic, because that's what, if any young guys are listening to this podcast and want to date, right, and you've got service, stability, and work ethic, right, you're going to get people that want to date you. People don't want to date flakes, right?
Oh my God, it's so true. I mean, what you're talking about there with the athletes. I know of elite AFL footballers who in the off season have telephoned a player from an opposition club to give them some perspectives that they might not have had that will help them become a better player
Wow.
because they've noticed stuff in the heat of competition, you know?
Yep.
And it's so true. And it's like I think there's a real interesting part. And, you know, a lot of this stuff comes, we learn these things through our own discovery of ourselves, you know, all those integrity courses we did, you know. I mean, just so brilliant that work. I mean, you just can't thank Harry Palmer enough. But, you know, looking at our own attitudes and what we're expecting from others and getting upset because we're not getting those things from others. Whereas the reason we're not getting it is because we're not giving it.
Exactly.
And and it's not transactional. So you don't give it for a while so that then you can start getting it. You just keep giving it, you
Yeah.
know, and then and you'll know a lot about this, and I'm interested in your perspective, is the more you give really selflessly with no hook, no agenda, one day you just realize, man, I feel happy. You know?
Yep.
And the happiness comes from your efforts to give to other people rather than what you get.
Yeah. Like it, you know, I often ask these CEOs or business owners at your end of your life, if you were to tally up, are you a net giver or a net getter? Are you taking more from life than you're giving? And, you know, I get them to actually do an inventory,
Yeah.
you know, an honest inventory. And you got to get them into feel first, because if they're just in their head, they'll make it up. But you get them into their heart space and you go, wow. And, you know, some of them just look at me and go, wow, I'm just getting, I just want more, 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 more. And I said, you know, like, what sort of world do you want? Do you want a world that's just driven by let's give more, 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 more? Or do you want a better world? What sort of world do you want your kids to come into? You know, and that sort of simple, what are you going to be a net giver or a net taker is a huge one for them. And I'm working with some guys who are billionaires, you know, and they're still not happy. They've got bad relationships with their kids. They've got bad relationships with their wives or the husbands, because a few of them are billionaires, and they're not happy. So no matter how much money you've got, you know, health is going to take you out and happiness is going to take you out, because who wants to be a depressed billionaire?
Yeah.
I'd rather be a happy poor man. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
because at least if I'm happy, you know, like I can go and do what I want and work at a cafe. I might not have everything I want, but in a funny way, you notice this with people as they get older, right? As people get older, give away a lot of stuff. They start to simplify their lives, right? And that's because by the time you get older, you realize that all that material gain that you were chasing, you know, the bike, the watch, the car, the this, the stat, the this, you know, the statue on your gate, you know, oh, I want this white picket fence. Oh, I want the Tesla. Or I don't want the Tesla. I want the roller. I want, you know, they just blend into insignificance. You know, after 2 weeks, the leather loses its smell. And then, you know, then you still got to try and find a car park. Then someone will coin it, you know, then then you have to pay your first repair bill. Do you know what I mean? So happiness and peace of mind is paramount, you know, and you know, if you can create wealth on top of it, that's great. You know, like, hey, and then that's great because you can create that, but think about happiness and peace of mind first, because I work with a lot of people who have done it the other way around, and they've killed they've trashed all their relationships, you know, they can't be trusted, they're seen as greedy and egotistical, right? And you know, who wants to hang out with greedy and egotistical? Put your hand up. Oh wow, look, this whole crowd wants to hang out with greedy, egotistical people. We love it. No, no one's going to put their hand up. So they've turned themselves into, in the chase of material wealth, someone that people don't want to hang out with. And then they don't know who their true friends are, because the people that are hanging around with them are exactly a copy of them. They're a replica.
And they're parasites, right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Back to you.
Back to me, right? It's always about me, Liam. It's always, but it's so interesting. I was many years ago. I turned the television on, and David Letterman was on, and he was interviewing Tom Arnold. Remember Tom Arnold? He was Roseanne Arnold's husband, and he was a successful actor. But apparently, he was really, really smart with real estate too. So the money that he made from acting, he multiplied it, and he ended up worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And very smart guy. And this interview with Letterman was very, very interesting. And Letterman said to him, "How has this wealth changed you?" And he sat there and he looked reflective and he sort of rocked back and he crossed his leg up over his knee and he said, "Well, David, until I had all this money, I just never realized how desperately I needed these alligator skin shoes I'm wearing."
Excellent. Oh,
The guy's okay. He's got a perspective,
yeah,
but
he's can make fun of himself, right?
yeah, yeah. But it's really, I mean, I also spoke with a guy who was heavily involved with Collingwood Football Club years ago. And the president of the football club was a fellow by the name of Ranald McDonald. And Ranald used to own the Age newspaper and he
Oh,
sold it to
right.
Fairfax. And so he was very, very wealthy. And I knew Ranald very, very well because he bought some health clubs and he wanted somebody to be the technical operator. And he contacted me and said, "I believe you're the guy." And like I was 24 years old. And so I worked with Ranald quite a lot. And he was an incredibly brilliant man, real visionary. And but anyway, this guy was telling, and Ranald was also the president of the Collingwood Football Club. And this guy was telling me that after a game one day, he walked into the change rooms and all the players were gone. They were up in the celebrations afterwards, drinking and eating and all that sort of stuff. And he said there was a lone figure in the change rooms cleaning the change rooms,
No way.
and it was Ronald McDonald.
Humility, eh?
Hmm. And
Yep.
Ronald's wife was Princess Diana's cousin,
Oh, really?
and Charlie and Di used to stay at their home when
No
they
way.
came to Melbourne. Yeah, so I mean that's the position that Ronald had in this world, but he still could clean the change rooms
Yep.
because what he wanted to do was make it lighter work for the cleaners.
Yeah. Always leave it better than you found it, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Always leave it better. Another great masculine trait, that humility, you know,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and
Just
understanding compound interest. That's the only other thing you have to know in life, right? All of those things, and I understand compound interest, you're done.
yes. Well, but that's the really interesting thing too. Practicing virtue has got compound interest and having that positive mental attitude. You're talking before about being positive. I'm always reminded of the Black Knight in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. He's had his arms and legs cut off and he's yelling out, "Well, come back here and I'll bite your legs off. All right, we'll call it a draw then.
We'll call it a draw. That's such a good movie. Oh man, this has been great.
But so, um, well, this has been a fantastic chat. I've got a question that I ask everybody as we, and perhaps even before I ask the question, is there anything else that you feel is that you'd like to add to the conversation?
I mean, really, I just think that we have a debt of gratitude to all our mothers, right?
Mm,
They gave us human birth. You
yeah,
know, just no matter what they turn out like, just go back to that.
yeah,
Um, and that's a gift, man. I mean, to be walking on this earth and have all the opportunities we have and the pleasures that we have and to see the colors. I mean, I'm looking out the window here and there's Bronte Beach. I mean, like, my God,
yeah,
you know, just to see I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful life. I mean, to have that human birth is, I mean, that's worth all the gold and whatever story you think about the Knights Templar ever had or whatever. So I think that's one thing is be grateful for human birth, even if you have circumstances that are tough.
yeah,
That's your gift too. Like that's like choose that as it's not happening to me. It was for me and by me. So it's you designed it before you came in. hey, I'm going to design this and going to give myself some shit to work through and see how I do, right? Because we are, as human spirits, we are unstoppable, unbreakable in so many ways, and we can forget that. Like this is who we are. We're
That's a good point too. We've got to remind each other. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and we can make it fun,
Yeah.
or we can make it do it the hard way. So like, I like to try and do it the I like to try and do it the fun. I've done it the hard way a few times, and I can tell you it's crap. Don't don't
Yeah.
do that. Like make it fun, keep it light. So I think that's the only thing I'd coming back to both masculinity and motherhood and your own birth. I mean, that's pretty special, right? That's pretty special. They gave their flesh and blood and time and effort and whatever to produce you. So
It is. In your formative years, as you're growing and you're working out who you wanted to be and how you were going to model yourself, was there anybody apart from your mum, I'm going to say, that you sort of looked at in the world and you went, that's how I want to be, like a level of quality that you saw?
well, this is going to sound weird, but you remember the Paul Hogan movie, right?
Crocodile Dundee?
Crocodile Dundee.
I was listening to an interview with him just yesterday, and he was talking about how he was at a function in New York, sitting at a table with Elizabeth Taylor, and Clint Eastwood walked over to the table, reached over, grabbed his bread and butter knife and said, "That's not a knife."
Like that movie was iconic. Do you know what I mean? And if no one's ever seen it, watch it and let go of the fact that it's 40 years old or whatever. But I saw myself a bit like the wild colonial boy, like going out there, like being a bit of a rebel and stuff like that. And I think I think that got me a long way, but it got me into a lot of trouble. So be careful. Be careful who you model yourself up. I should have just gone, well, that's one of the models that I can do, and then there's others. And I think, that was quite funny you asking me that question. But that's my real honest answer.
Yeah, mate, I agree with you. I mean, I was in love with Charles Bronson when I was
Yeah,
growing up,
yeah.
Just but the other character I loved in that movie was David Gulpilil, the full-blood Aboriginal man, because he comes up to Mick out at dusk, and he's full, just a loincloth and a spear, and he's got a bit of paint, and his hair's all tied, and they have a bit of a chat, and he walks off, and he's wearing a pair of red Adidas runners.
I mean, movies like that probably will never be made again.
No, no.
But good bloke, not woke. Good way to end. But that was the truth of it, and that was my choice, and then I've had to sort of create other role models, and do it by navigating and making mistakes, and looking in the mirror. I think if you make mistakes or you do something you shouldn't have done, and you take the time to look in the mirror afterwards to reflect back and go, oh yeah, that wasn't good. I don't want to be doing that again. And that's self-correction, correcting yourself when no one else is there, because you can be corrected when someone else is there in the room, but that doesn't build character. What builds character is self-correction. That's all I've got.
You and I have a dear friend in common. There are times when I look at my situation and I ask myself a simple question: what would Shona do right now?
Mate, I never asked myself that question because she'd never do what I do.
Well, it's like it hits me into a point where
Yeah.
I cannot deny what I need to do right here in this moment, and it's lovely to have role models like that.
No, I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
She's a special woman, special lady.
special lady. Well, mate, thank you so much. Been such a pleasure, and I hope a lot of people get to tune into this and reflect on their own mums and how they're treating their mums now, and what and even some of the men out there who are married, how are your sons treating your wife, and we work on that one a bit, and make it a bit more positive and have more honor and more respect. So Thanks again, bud.
Thank you. And I'm just about to jump into me jeans and put on a decent shirt and head off to a client.
Beautiful, mate. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. And don't forget, when you're out there in the world, be that adult that you needed when you're a little kid and you were frightened or you're in trouble. Thanks again.
Yeah. Ciao, John.
Thanks.